Ethiopians are an unwarlike people. Ethiopia is open for business not only for colony of smiths, carpenters, masons and surgeons, but also start-up technology companies and foreign direct investments in all sectors of its economy. But Ethiopia is absolutely closed for the business of meddling in its internal affairs, lies and disinformation and sanctions and threats of punitive measures by self-appointed caretakers of Ethiopia. Hello families of Ethiopia today. Welcome to your channel. Our today's presentation focuses on ongoing South Africa peace talks at the midst of military collapse of the rebel group. This is a very important journalist analysis and predictions of TPLF's fate, and we encourage you to stay with us till the end, and please also like and share the video and help us reach out to more audience as much we can. First-time visitors, don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell. Then you won't miss out very important and the exciting videos we bring to you. You can also partner with us by donating via our website www.ethiopiatodayofficial.org/donate. Let's get into the presentation. Ethiopian peace talks underway as rebel TPLF militarily suffered hugely and facing disintegration as an entity. Negotiations between the Ethiopian federal government and the TPLF began in South Africa on October 25 at the midst of military collapse of the latter. The civil war in Ethiopia started after the TPLF attacked a federal army base in November 2020. The African Union (AU) led peace negotiations between the Ethiopian federal government and the US-backed Tigray People's Liberation Front (TPLF), which was scheduled to begin in South Africa on Monday, began on Tuesday, October 25. Representatives of both sides arrived in South Africa's executive capital Pretoria on Monday. The negotiations, mediated by the AU chairperson's High Representative for Horn of Africa Olusegun Obasanjo, South Africa's former Deputy President Phumzile Mlambo Ngcuka, and former Kenyan President Uhuru Kenyatta. The civil war in northern Ethiopia appears to be nearing an end after nearly 2 years since it began on November 4, 2020, when the TPLF attacked an army base of the Ethiopian National Defense Force (ENDF) in Mekelle, the regional capital of Tigray. Several reports claiming that the ENDF has already entered Mekelle, and that the TPLF leaders have fled the city. While these reports remain unverified at this time, the TPLF's capacity to defend its positions in its stronghold has been severely hampered after the federal army captured several strategically important towns and cities of Tigray region. Under the circumstances, the question remains whether the current negotiations will be peace talks or about an exit strategy for the TPLF, according to close observer Kenyan journalist Karanja Gakuka, quoted on People's Dispatch news site. While reiterating that the ENDF will endeavor to avoid fighting in urban areas, a statement on October 18 by the Government Communications Service of the federal government confirmed that the ENDF has taken control of the towns of Shire, Alamata and Korum without fighting in urban areas. Among the largest cities in the Tigray state, Shire lies only 140 kilometers to Mekelle's northwest and is equipped with an airport. Between 170 and 180 kilometers to Mekelle's south are the towns of Korum and Alamata. Predicting that the capture of Shire was imminent, French journalist René Lefort, who takes pro-TPLF positions, had tweeted on October 16 that once Shire is taken, the TPLF will no longer have the military capacity to prevent the ENDF from eventually reaching Mekelle. He was quoted on People's Dispatch as asserting that the TPLF has been incapacitated essentially due to lack of munition. With a military defeat thus appearing imminent for the TPLF, UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres recently raised the alarm that the conflict was spiraling out of control. The Ethiopian Prime Minister's National Security Advisor Redwan Hussein retorted back by saying that the conflict was spiraling when being expanded to other regions. The TPLF has twice taken the war to Tigray's neighboring regional states. Its first offensive beyond the border of Tigray came after the federal government declared a unilateral ceasefire on June 29, 2021, and withdrew from Tigray the troops it had ordered in soon after the TPLF's attack on its base in Mekelle. The TPLF made rapid advances southward, stealing over 1,000 trucks of the World Food Programme WFP and using them to transport fighters including children who are allegedly conscripted under threat and used as cannon fodder in human wave attacks. During its assault on the neighboring states of Amhara and Afar, the TPLF committed atrocities on civilians, including burning of villages, mass killings of civilians, and gang rapes. The TPLF reached almost 200 kilometers from the capital Addis Ababa by November last year because of the fact that they, emboldened by West support, particularly the Biden administration and end-of-the-world media narrative and disinformation by Western mainstream media outlets. At the time, the US government, whose diplomatic maneuvers were all aimed at depicting Ethiopia's federal government as the aggressor, appeared to openly throw its weight behind the TPLF. Furthermore, we heard and seen joke of the century from Washington, D.C. On November 5, 2021, a ceremony was hosted in Washington, D.C. to inaugurate a new coalition against the federal government, comprised of the TPLF and 8 other armed groups, some which were allegedly fictitious and created only on paper to amplify the size of the armed opposition. The TPLF's advances were reversed within a short span of time despite the foreign support it received and what many Ethiopians perceived as the UN's partiality in joining in the Western attempts to depict the federal government as the aggressor while largely ignoring the TPLF's atrocities. The ENDF, along with the militias of Amhara and Afar regional states, drove the TPLF back to Tigray. However, Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed ordered his troops not to pursue the TPLF into Tigray. After encircling the TPLF inside Tigray by the start of this year, the federal government declared a ceasefire in March in order to enable the much-needed flow of humanitarian aid. The TPLF reciprocated and the ceasefire held out till August. However, in August the TPLF dismissed the credibility of AU, which had been working to lay the basis for negotiations, and called for Western intervention. This happened shortly after envoys of the US and EU met TPLF leaders in Mekelle. On August 24, the rebel group resumed warfare in the neighboring regions of Amhara and Afar. The TPLF invaded the neighboring state of Amhara once again, on 2 fronts. Its westward offensive aimed to open a corridor to Sudan, which is known to be supporting the TPLF, while the southward offensive was an attack on the strategic district of Raya Kobo that borders Tigray to its north and Afar to its east. The highway between Mekelle and Addis Ababa passes through this strategically important district in northeast Amhara's North Wallo zone. Successfully defeating both these offensives, the ENDF went on the offensive, wresting control of several strategic towns and cities from the TPLF and advancing towards Mekelle. Coming in the backdrop of a looming military defeat for the TPLF, Guterres recently remarked about the conflict spiraling out of control provoked a quick response from Redwan Hussein, who pointed out that the conflict had in fact been spiraling out when the TPLF was on the offensive in the neighboring state. Now, it's just being extinguished. Aid and services to follow soon, Hussein remarked. The Ethiopian GCS's statement on October 18 added that the government of Ethiopia is carrying out the necessary preparations and will coordinate with the relevant humanitarian agencies to provide humanitarian aid through these areas that have come under the control of ENDF, including via the Shire airport. The latest development shows humanitarian aid is resumed, and restoration of basic services is also underway on areas controlled by the federal troops. This means conditions on the ground have been much improved, contrary to the spread of unsubstantiated concerns about further crimes against humanity and a heightened risk of genocide in the Tigray region. The Ethiopian government warned that it is forced to weigh its options and consider its relations with some states and entities that it accused of making unsubstantiated and politically motivated accusations of such gravity against the country. A statement released by the Office of the Federal Government Communications Service says Ethiopia can no longer tolerate the defamatory falsehood being spread against Ethiopia by various Western entities, says the statement. The bandwagon of accusations and slander does not change facts on the ground. The government acknowledges that some venerable organizations and well-meaning actors could be unwitting participants in this campaign. It is recalled that on the 14th of October, Deputy Prime Minister and Foreign Affairs Minister Damoka Makonnen wrote a letter to the Irish government threatening to cut diplomatic ties if Ireland does not refrain from undermining Ethiopia's sovereignty and territorial integrity. Pavan Kulkarni also noted on People's Dispatch site that videos have since surfaced from ENDF-controlled areas showing the distribution of food aid that had apparently been hoarded by the TPLF. The TPLF's denial of food aid to the families of those unable or unwilling to fight in the war against the federal government has been well documented. By the time the TPLF broke the ceasefire and resumed hostilities on August 24, nearly half of the population in Tigray was in severe need of food aid according to the WFP. The situation in northern Ethiopia will come to an end, peace will prevail. We will not continue fighting forever, Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed said on October 20, the day when the federal government accepted the AU's invitation to take part in the peace talks in South Africa. He added, "I believe that in a short period of time, we will stand with our Tigrayan brothers for peace and development." On October 14, U.S. State Secretary Antony Blinken again referred to the TPLF as Tigrayan authorities and called on the ENDF, which is alleged to be receiving support from Eritrea, to cease their joint offensive. Repeating Blinken's insistence on a negotiated settlement, the Council of European Union (EU) said in a statement on October 17, the EU calls for an immediate halt to the joint offensives launched by Ethiopian National Defense Forces in collaboration with Eritrean Defense Forces, and a full withdrawal of Eritrean troops from the sovereign territory of Ethiopia. While neither Ethiopia nor Eritrea have acknowledged the presence of Eritrean troops on Ethiopia's territory, the two governments have a cooperation agreement, Pavan Kulkarni highlighted. Eritrea has a considerable stake in ensuring that the TPLF is not resurrected. It was the TPLF which had led Ethiopia into a war with Eritrea while it ruled the country with the backing of the US after coming to power in 1991. Opposition parties and free press had no space in Ethiopia under the TPLF's rule. After being deposed from federal power in 2018 following massive pro-democracy protests, the TPLF was reduced to a regional party, in power in Tigray alone. It opposed the peace agreement signed between Eritrea and the new Ethiopian federal government led by Abiy Ahmed. This peace agreement was followed by a tripartite agreement for cooperation between Ethiopia, Eritrea, and Somalia. Historian and former Ethiopian diplomat Mohammed Hassan maintains that these agreements toward resolving the conflicts between the countries and people in the Horn of Africa undermine the ability of Western governments to pursue their interests by projecting military power. He therefore argues that the US and the EU are using the TPLF as a proxy to reignite conflicts in this region. TPLF's war on Ethiopian government is a US-EU-backed ploy to thwart cooperation in the Horn of Africa, says former Ethiopian diplomat. The TPLF has taken away a convoy of 1,700 trucks from humanitarian organizations as well as from the government. These foreign powers didn't utter a word, Pavan continues. The huge amount of fuel was robbed by the TPLF. These foreign governments didn't say anything to condemn the act of this terrorist organization, remarked Aragawi Berahi, who is a chairperson of the Tigray Democratic Party. He added that they are doing this simply because the TPLF was a loyal servant of them and they want to push the legitimate government of Ethiopia to accept the TPLF and give it a share of power so that they will come again through the TPLF to execute their own selfish desires. While the US and the EU have been calling on Eritrea to not intervene in this conflict, the Ethiopian diaspora demonstrated near the White House in Washington, D.C. on October 23, condemning US interference in the TPLF's favor. At a similar demonstration outside the EU Commission on October 20, one protester held up a placard confronting Josep Borrell, its vice president, who recently provoked a controversy by referring to Europe as a garden and the developing world as jungle. The protester's placard read, "Joseph Borrell, don't forget that African lions live in the jungle." On October 22, millions took part in mass demonstrations held in over 20 cities across different regional states of Ethiopia against excessive foreign intervention. No more proxy war. Disarm TPLF. Stop elongating TPLF's survival in the guise of negotiation, and Tigrayans are our people and TPLF is our enemy, were among the common slogans raised at the demonstrations across the country. We had a state before the European states, the US and the rest. We had a structured government, religion, language and law. We had never surrendered to colonialism and never allowed foreign powers to run our country, said famous Ethiopian actor Dababa Ishichu while addressing the demonstration in Addis Ababa. Taking aim at Borrell's garden and jungle comparison, which was widely condemned as racist, Ishichu said, "Some with colonial mindset call our part of the world a jungle. We want to remind them about the victory of Adwa," referring to Ethiopia's victory against the invading Italian forces in 1896. "We are the lions in the jungle, whose roar has silenced a colonial ambition," he added. This brings to the end of our presentation. Thanks for staying with us. Don't forget to like, share, post your comments, and subscribe to our channel. Let's work with the algorithm of the platform. These are the ways you can support our channel to continue producing this and similar contents. You can also support our works by donating via our website www.ethiopiatodayofficial.org/donate. May God bless Ethiopia and its people. Thanks again.